It's just a very basic fundamental rule that the more status that you earn, the better everything else gets. And that was true a million years ago. That's true today, all around it, all over human life.
Welcome to the Examined Life podcast with me, Kenny Primrose. In this podcast, I speak with a range of influential thinkers about the question they think we should be asking ourselves. The series has so far zoomed in on our native spirituality, the way we think about the passage of human generations, our relationships to pain and pleasure, and what it might mean to more fully embrace our finitude. To find out more about the series, visit the website at examined-life.com and sign up for the newsletter. I hope you enjoy today's conversation. What would it mean for you to feel as if you were winning at life? The fact that the question even makes sense suggests that on some level we understand life as a kind of game, one in which there are rules, there are winners and there are losers. In today's episode, I'm speaking to the journalist and author Will Storr. Will has written a number of influential and popular books, including Heretics, Selfie, and most recently, Status Games. In our conversation today, we discuss the different games that we play in life, why we have evolved to play them, and the value of becoming more consciously aware of them. Welcome, Will Storr. It's a joy to be speaking to you today. Thank you very much for agreeing to come on the podcast. During your career, you have spent a lot of time thinking and writing on a huge range of different topics, on storytelling, the beliefs we hold, how we became so individualistic in the West, and recently the importance of status and the games we play to try and get it in life. So your writing explores this range of different ideas and questions, but I wonder whether we could begin by homing in on the question that you think we would all do well to ask ourselves today.
So my question is, how do you keep score? I think it's a really important question because I think that we're constantly playing sort of games with life in a number of ways, and everybody kind of keeps score in a different set of ways. But it's not very often that we see our lives like that. It's not very often that we see ourselves like that. So I just thought it'd be interesting to sort of think about that in a direct way, like, how do we keep score of who we are and how we're doing in life?
So I wonder if maybe we could begin with the games then. If we're kind of talking about life as if it's a game, things are gamified, we're winning or we're losing, we're up or down. What are the games that we play?
Well, there are two principal games that we play. We have this kind of weird duality in our brains that we often think of as conscious and unconscious. And that's correct. But the conscious experience of life is a story. We experience our lives consciously as this unfolding narrative with us at the center of it, and it's a place of heroes and villains and victories and all that stuff, allies and enemies. But the vast majority of who we are is subconscious, and the subconscious is interesting to me because it, as I said before, it resembles a game. There's a neuroscientist, Chris Frith, that says that the brain processes our reality, our environment, as a reward space. It's constantly detecting these kind of threats and opportunities. That's what's going on underneath the hood of our consciousness. And so there are two kind of systems that detect different games. And the first one, psychologists call it the sociometer. It's this system which checks how connected we are to other people, how liked we are, how loved we are. So how secure our relationships are, how many friends we've got, how popular we are. So that's one kind of game that we're playing. It's with connection and belonging. And then there's another set of another system in the brain, which is called the status detection system, which neuroscientists also talk about, which is that sense of not how connected we are, but how well we're doing versus other people, how much status we are accruing, how much value other people see that we have, how much value we're providing to other people. So those are the two sort of big subconscious games, I think, which is this sort of connection and status. How how liked we are and how admired we are. I think those are the two big games of human life.
And as you say, as your kind of question implies, it's relative to how other people are doing, right? How those around us are doing. We kind of compare ourselves amongst ourselves. I think you described, perhaps in the book Status Games, success as in one of these games as like a nutrient for the brain.
Status, yeah. I mean, they both are really. I mean, the status game was obviously about status. I talked to people about a connection there too, because that's also equally important to people, but that wasn't the subject of the book. But they're both social nutrients. I mean, humans are, we're highly social animals. We're highly social apes. We survive. We get what we want out of the world by cooperating with each other in a way that no other animal does, anything like the extent that we do. So our brain is highly attuned to our relationships, our social relationships, and so. And those are the two kind of dimensions in which we are kind of connect, either positively or negatively, getting on with the people around us, how liked we are and how admired we are. So yeah, it all comes back to the fact that we are these incredibly social animals that rely on cooperation in order to survive in a way that no other animal does.
This idea of kind of point scoring and it being a game, it suggests that we're doing well. We're getting the social nutrients, the success nutrients that we need because other people are doing less well than us. Is that a kind of a predicate of this game, that someone is always going to be winning because it's a zero sum in some sense?
Thankfully, no. I mean, so the different games we play in life can be set up in different ways. And of course, it is true that there are such things as zero sum games. The actual games that we play in life, like football and Monopoly, they're zero sum games, and they're entertaining. They're absorbing because they're using that status detection system circuitry that evolved actually to manage our social life. We didn't evolve Monopoly playing and football playing, circuits in our brains. We evolved status detection system, and so. When we're playing football and Monopoly and those kinds of actual games, we're just using that circuitry that evolved for tribal life, and that's why they're so much fun. But they're also can be very disappointing, upsetting, because they're set up to be zero sum games, which amplifies their drama and amplifies how much we're kind of absorbed by them. But it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, in the tribes in which we evolved, it wasn't that we wanted to be. It wasn't that we had to be the best sweet potato finder or the best storyteller in order to be happy. We just had to be seen as a good one. That was enough. And in the status game, I describe there are two kinds of status games. One being Enron, the company Enron, which is famously the most corrupt company that ever existed. people often say. And Enron had this brutally zero sum game in which they had this thing called the rank and yank system, whereby every quarter the management would sit down with a spreadsheet and they'd assess you, and they'd put you in a chart, and in sort of the top 15% would get promoted, the bottom 15% would get fired, and everybody else would just be terrified. And so that's a horrific status game to play because it's completely zero sum. You have to make sure in that top 15% if you're going to thrive, and so everyone's jealously withholding status. No one's wanted to give it out, so no one's cooperating properly, and everyone starts cutting corners and cheating. But the opposite of that is the keep fit, kind of cultish keep fit craze, which is known as CrossFit. I don't know if you're aware of CrossFit.
Yeah, very much. You're running that house regularly. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So CrossFit's one of those ones like being vegan or going to Oxford or Cambridge, where if you're into it, they'll tell you within 30 seconds. They'll find some way of letting you know. It's that old joke. How do you know if someone does CrossFit? They don't tell you. So it's one of those things, but it is like a cult. People are very proud of being members of CrossFit. But CrossFit is a brilliantly engineered status game because it's not zero sum. It's designed specifically not to be zero sum, in that people go to CrossFit, they have what's called a workout of the day. We have to do a certain set of tasks, like pushing heavy things or whatever it might be, lifting weights, running around a thing. But they're all tuned to your particular level of fitness. So you're not competing with anybody in the room. You're just competing with yourself or your own previous past performance. And it's culturally kind of critical in CrossFit that everybody cheers everybody else on. Everybody is there for each other. Everybody kind of gives it that big American "woohoo, you can do it" kind of thing. And so it's the opposite of Enron in that status is freely given out, and so that's why people become addicted to it. When psychologists study CrossFit, as they have done, to try and figure out why it becomes so addictive, that's what they say is the crux of it all. Is this that people go and feel connected, and also they feel valuable, they feel amazing because everyone's pumping kind of status into them. So these games don't have to be zero sum, and certainly connection is not about zero sum. Connection is simply am I liked? Do I feel connected into this group? So being liked and being valued are different dimensions, are different kinds of games that we play.
So in a sense, it's easier to see how status or being valued is kind of gamified. But in what sense would you say connection is gamified? And what way are we up or down, winning or losing when it comes to social connection and being liked?
In the sense, like, I think people really rear back from the word game because you think I'm comparing marriage and love to fucking game of darts. It's like, I'm not saying it's the same, like it's as important, but it's simply the fact that it's a system of kind of rules and rewards. Like the brain knows that it's got a goal. I want to be in love with my wife or my husband. I want to have some friends. That's connection. But in order to sustain love with my wife or have friends, I need to follow these certain social rules. And then we get rewards. The better we follow them, the more connected we are, the happier we feel. So that's all I mean by a game. That it has that game structure of goals, rules, and rewards. That's basically what a game is. And as I said, that's why we enjoy playing games, because they're using that circuitry. They're just co-opting that circuitry. So it is. I mean, marriage is a game. Friends is a game. Love is a game. Like in that sort of basic fundamental sense, it is. We're pursuing these goals and getting rewards or punishments depending on how well we follow the rules.
Well, this is still a game that we're kind of, keeping score. We're up or we're down. So, is this something you do? How do you kind of consciously keep score of whether you're up or down?
No, it's weird. I remember it sort of writing the status game gave me this memory, this flashback of when I was sort of in my late teens, early 20s, and I had this like it was like an early kind of iPod type of thing. It was like iPhone thing. It was like a digital organizer called a Scion, and it had this graph thing. And I decided one day to start like giving every day a mark out of 10 and plotting them on a graph and trying to figure out patterns in it. And I had to stop doing it because it was sending me completely. It was sending me mad. Like I was getting obsessed with these graphs, and I was thinking, I'm glad I stopped doing that. So no, it's not conscious. I mean, that's what I think is interesting. Is it's all unconscious, and you can see it in all these different kinds of dimensions. Even in the extent of your, marriage or your long-term relationship. So, how do you and your partner keep score of how well your relationship is doing? To some people, sex is of primary importance. To other couples, sex doesn't really matter that much, as long as there's a bit of it there every now and again. And of course, it's just incredibly complex how two people happen to keep score of how well their long-term relationship is doing. And it's that kind of map of scores is probably unique to every relationship, that very intricate way of that people have of figuring out how well things are going, and the vast majority of it is subconscious, so that you're just not thinking about it. I mean, one of the ways the brain keeps track is by judging and sort of measuring how much eye contact you're receiving from the people around you, and it does it with sort of numerical precision. It's always checking it out.
So you're doing unconscious computations all the time,
constantly, and so and the feedback comes in emotion, the feedback comes in feelings, and then we tell stories about those feelings, which may or may not be true. So yeah, I mean, that's why I just think it's a fascinating question to talk about, because so much of it is unconscious, and until you actually make that conscious, until you actually start looking for it, you're just not aware of what your brain's doing when it's keeping track of these various games that you're playing with in life.
Yeah, I like there are certain people in my life who I come across now and again, and it's been pointed out to me by people like my wife that, you know, I tense up and I start coming up with such like competitive nonsense. It just comes out of me. It doesn't. I feel kind of drained and uneasy with myself after these conversations. It's like, what's happened to me? What spell has that person cast on me? And I guess it's a game that you just like something. They're emitting something that draws me in, and I'm like, all right, we're playing. And we're both gonna humiliate ourselves by bragging somehow, and then we'll leave feeling kind of slightly like,
yeah, awful. Yeah, completely. I mean, because you've got to remember, the vast majority of us is subconscious. So these people are triggering something in your status detection system that's making your subconscious go, no, I'm not having this, and you know, but I mean, that's why I think, you know, that's what I got out of writing the book. Really, was just, I think it's so powerful to make that unconscious stuff conscious, because then you can see it, and then you can realize what's happening, and you don't have to take it. So you're empowered, I think, a little bit not to take it so seriously. You see what you're doing, you see what your brain is doing, and you can just go, "Oh, stop it! It doesn't really matter," you know.
Yeah, that's exactly why I love your question, Will. It has this power to kind of remove the spell. It's like psychotherapy at its best. It makes you aware of those script messages and behaviors that you've grown up with so that they no longer have power over you because you've become kind of conscious of it. But I guess a question that comes to mind for me is whether we can ever actually escape these status games completely, in a sense. So does the way that nature is mean we ought always to behave like that? We're biologically wired to play these games, but can we, in some sense, go against our biology? For example, I don't know if this is a good analogy or not, but you could argue that patriarchal societies are kind of in our wiring. We've always had alpha males, etc. But we decide as 21st century enlightened people to push back on that bit of evolutionary biology. Where I'm coming from is that playing status games seems like it's a quick route to mischief. And maybe the only way to win is kind of not to play the game. If we feel like we can step outside these status games, there might be some liberation in that. Though from what I'm gathering, that's maybe not an option. We're plugged into these games whether we want to be or not. Can you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you said that there's not, you know, perhaps the idea is that the only way I can win is by stepping out of these games. But to me, stepping out of these games, that's the definition of a loser. Like if you stop caring about whether or not other people consider you to be of value, if you stop caring about whether other people think that you're worth being in company with, then good luck. You know, you because your life is going to be over. You are going to be the literal definition of a loser. And I think that, you know, probably some of the language that I use by saying game, the status game, it definitely gets people's backs up. I've learned this since the book was published 18 months ago. People don't like it because they think it's cynical, and they think it's that I'm kind of shitting on the human condition. But actually, I'm not shitting on the human condition at all. Because, like, it's certainly true, and I explore in depth about all the terrible things that happen when we pursue status in these kind of blind ways. But it's also the very best of the human condition. When people invented the vaccines that got us out of the COVID pandemic, those individual scientists would have cared very deeply about their reputations in the scientific community. That they would have been partly driven by the idea that their peers, the people whose opinions they value, would be thinking that they're incredible. They've done an incredible job by inventing the AstraZeneca vaccine or the Pfizer vaccine. You know, that drives people. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a really good thing, because without that drive, where does the impulse to create civilization and progress come from? So when scientists talk about these ideas, they kind of differentiate between two kind of forms of motivation. I talk about the ultimate motivation and the proximate motivation. So and I think it's really important to kind of explain that, because I think it takes the sting out of a lot of this stuff. So proximate motivations, proximate reasons for us doing what we're doing are the ones that first come to mind. That's this, that's I want to create a vaccine because I want a few people to die. I want to create a vaccine because, I don't know, AstraZeneca pay my wages and I've got a responsibility. I've signed a contract. These are all proximate reasons. So what I'm talking about in the status game and what I'm talking about when I'm talking about connection, these are ultimate motivations. So, why do you want to eat a pizza? Because I love pizza. Pizza's delicious. That's the proximate motivation. The ultimate motivation is because I crave carbs and sugars and fats, because that's what keeps me alive. And so one doesn't cancel the other out. It's just an explanation on a different level. So status and connection, they're ultimate motivations. They're basic fundamental things that kind of drive us. They don't cancel out the altruism. They don't cancel out the good things, the things that we like to tell ourselves. But they're just at the very root of them. And so so our deep evolved desire to feel that other people value us, that creates everything good in the world. That creates progress, civilization, technology. That sent us to space and to the bottom of the sea. So I don't know why you would want to destroy the status game, because we would end up going back into the forest and the jungles, as far as I could see,
and playing different games. I suppose the talk of motivation, I mean, is that it suggests that what we do to play status game is all extrinsic motivation rather than intrinsic. And talking totally anecdotally, but I think of a few people I've known who've been homeschooled, and one of the things that's lovely about them is they haven't learned those status games that we learn in school, which are just like awful. They're about your trainers or your haircut or whatever, and so they just like, I'll do what I like because I'm not playing this status game. There's something that feels like liberating about that, and they're kind of intrinsically motivated by maybe curiosity. I'm talking about the best examples of homeschooling, intrinsically motivated by curiosity. And I guess part of me wonders whether just playing those status games as your main motivation, are you in some sense kind of shortchanging yourself of following curiosity into other areas that it's intrinsically interesting? Do you know what I mean? That's a poorly phrased question.
No, because I think it's a false dichotomy. It's not curiosity or status. I think if you're satisfying your curiosity and you're going into a world, you go into the world, say you're a scientist and you're curious about, I don't know, how bacteria works, for example, you become a bacteriologist. So that's great. You're curious. You're satisfying your curiosity. But now you're in this world of other bacteriologists. And if you've got an ordinarily functioning brains, part of your brain's going to go, I want that bacteriologist and that bacteriologist who I really look up to admire me and think I'm good. So I want to impress them. So I'm going to write a really brilliant paper about bacteriology. So it's not curiosity or status, it's both. It's just that status is this. I mean, as I write in the book, it's this basic fundamental rule of the human brain. Since before we were human, it's been, and it's also the case for many, many animals, that the more status that you earn, the better you're able you are to survive and reproduce. But back in the days of the hunter-gatherer tribe, the more status that we earned in the tribe, the more food we'd got, the better food we got, the safer our sleeping sites, the greater access to choice of mates. It's just a very basic fundamental rule that the more status that you earn, the better everything else gets. And that was true 1 million years ago. That's true today, all around it, all over human life. They tried to make it not true in the Soviet Union. It was a total disaster. They ended up with with more social classes in Moscow than we have in London. So you can't eradicate it from the human condition, and I think it's a mistake to condescend to it. I think it's a mistake to kind of curl our kind of lips up at it a bit. I think that's I think that's an error. But I think it's human nature to do that.
In the second half of this conversation, Will discusses the different types of games we play, both as human culture has evolved and as it varies from east to west, from collectivist to individualist societies. We also talk about the way that as we grow older, different games will make sense and other ones will become less relevant. So I guess maybe the question is to do with how we might discern what the right status games to be playing are and what ones we should be avoiding. What ones have less risk and what ones have more reward. Have you got a kind of criteria by which you might judge that one game is worth engaging with and another isn't? We can, if status is the nutrient we're looking for, we can get a lot of that kind of nutrient through rising to high levels within a gang, but it's not necessarily a good game to be playing.
Well, what's interesting about if you look at human evolution is that all these kind of games that we play for status have their the social games have their roots in human tribes, in hunter-gatherer tribes. And so before we kind of gathered together in these cooperative groups, we were just like most animals in that we play status games with dominance. We'd just push each other around and have fights and kill each other. But then when you start trying to solve the problem of living in cooperative groups, you can't do that anymore because it's about cooperation, not pushing each other around. So we have to find new ways of playing status games. And so you start to be rewarded for being cooperative, for adding value to the missions of the group. And there are two different ways that you can do that if you're a human being. The first way is by being virtuous. So you can be generous, you can be selfless, but it's also about superstition and religion, knowing all the knowing all the sacred stories and believing them and following them and making sure that everybody else is following. So you're enforcing the rules, knowing all the rituals, all that kind of stuff. So being virtuous, being courageous in battle. So that's one way of being of value to your cooperative group. The second way, of course, is by being competent, just by getting really good at something. So by being a great hunter, a great honey finder, a great storyteller. I call these virtue games and success games. And of course, that's still who we are today. You can look at the Pope and the Dalai Lama before the recent incident, perhaps, of being kind of virtue-based superstars. So no, we don't look up to the Pope because of his competence. He's not really amazing at holding the host up or anything like that. He's a virtue superstar for Catholics. He's the head of the Catholic status game. I was raised a Catholic, and believe me, the idea that Catholicism isn't a status game. It's hiding in plain sight. I mean, you call priests father and you genuflect to them, these strange men in their robes, and they've got gold and they've got big hats. And when the bishop comes round, he's called Your Grace. I mean, it's not even hidden in Catholic Church, the status stuff there. And it's very Jesus-like as well. It's very strange. So that's virtue games. And you can think Michelle Obama is better known for her virtue than her competence, you could argue. People on, these warriors on social media like Jamila Jamil or Lawrence Fox. I mean, they're playing these games with their actors, both of those people, but they're probably better known for their kind of virtue play on social media, I would argue. And then there's competence. There's Serena Williams. There's Elon Musk. People who we know or Gordon Ramsay. People that we know primarily for being really amazing at stuff. Pop stars are amazing dancers, amazing songwriters, amazing performers. So virtue games and success games. These are the two kind of status games that make up the most of human life. For me, the best games. I mean, as a born and raised lefty, my assumption was that it was the virtue games. If you wanted to make the world a better place, play a virtue game. But that's actually not true. If you want to make the world a better place, you play success games, because the people who invented all these vaccines, worked out how cholera spread, and so on and so on and so on, have saved many more lives than all the popes put together, or the imams put together. The people that really make the world a better place are the ones that are playing these kind of virtue-inflected success games. That's what I believe.
It's interesting. I was thinking You mentioned the kind of I suppose hypocrisy in the church, in the Catholic Church, because it doesn't really reflect the founder. But Jesus is interesting on that level. When you're reading the Gospels, that you have him very much subverting the status games of his day, right? He's sticking his fingers
Yeah.
up to those with status and pulling the people from the margin into the center and saying these people have status. And it feels like a kind of direct inversion of the status game that people played. I mean, do you see that kind of thing played out now and again, where you have some um and one of your suggestions is to be original, right? To break from the norm and kind of um be successful or virtuous in an area other people haven't. And you see people breaking out of normal status games or conventional status games and creating different ones.
Well, yeah, you do. So there's a theory which is I think holds a lot of water. They talk about elite overproduction, and there's a guy called Peter Turchin that writes a lot about elite overproduction and looks back in history, periods when civilizations have collapsed. And this phenomena, he argues, happens when a kind of a civilization is producing more elites that it can satisfy, that it can find jobs and positions to. And what happens then is those elites then start creating their own status games and start subverting the one that's kind of holding power at that time. So I think that's one way that it happens. And I think what also happens is that you see in kind of revolutionary movements, utopian movements is always the same. Basically, is that they argue that we don't want this hierarchy, we don't want this power structure. It's evil. All the wrong people are on the top. And so that it sounds great. Oh, we want a future of no hierarchy. We want a future where there's no status, where everything's peace and love, and we're just sharing. But what they always construct is just a reverse hierarchy. So that's what happened in the Soviet Union. So what happened under communism is that the people that were at the top went on the bottom, and the people on the bottom were at the top, and the people that were on the top were then bullied and oppressed. And so it's just a flippage. And that kind of aligns with what we know about human, sort of tribal human nature. And one of the most unfortunate ramifications of our tribal brains is that not only are we, we're not natural born sexists, we're not natural born racists, but we are natural born xenophobes. We privilege our groups, and we also want our groups to win, even if it means that we ourselves get less. The fact of our groups winning is really important to us. So, yeah, that's one of the most kind of problematic parts of the kind of human condition, is the fact that we tell seductive stories about equality, but what the subconscious brain really wants is to win. And you see that going back in history, these revolutionary movements is all they do is create a new hierarchy with guess what, themselves at the top and their old enemies at the bottom.
It's interesting. Look, I mean, I sent your book and some of your other books are works of anthropology. Like, what does it mean to kind of be a human? Is that something you take? Yeah. And there's
definitely, yeah.
There's, as kind of written about widely, big differences in collectivist and individualist societies, and the status games you play there are significantly different. I remember reading, this is quite an interesting observation by G.K. Chesterton, who said that the fairy tales we used to read were about a kind of ordinary person in an enchanted, extraordinary world, and now they're about an extraordinary person in a mundane world. As this, like, is a nice observation of the way our stories have shifted. And yeah, I suppose from your observations, like, which have been a lot of them in selfie, about the whole self-esteem movement becoming hyper individualist and kind of eating ourselves with it.
I suppose I'm trying to ask whether we could do with changing the games we play. Like, is it at about time that we became a bit less individualistic in our games and maybe a little bit more like the collectivist ones in the East?
I think it's an impossible question to answer. There's no answer to that question. There are certain questions which are just, you can only answer them by telling a story. So it's like saying, is capitalism good or bad? There's no answer to that question. Is religion good or bad? There's no answer to that question, because religion does terrible things, but it's also, billions of people get enormous amounts of meaning and pleasure and community and satisfaction and status out of their religion. So why would you take it away from people? And I think it's the same between East versus West, individualism versus collectivism. You can see what we've lost a bit in the West with our individualistic tendencies. We are highly perfectionistic. We suffer from high rates of mental illness, depression. It's sometimes a brutal ideology, because individualism says that your success is all on your shoulders, and it's great when we win, because when we win, we are a culture that ever since the Greeks has believed in individual heroes. So we praise Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Serena Williams or Michelle Obama, whoever it is, and you're amazing, and we forget that actually it was teams of people that got them to where they are. But the dark side of that, of course, is when we fail, and most of what we do as human beings is fail. That's our fault too. And so that's brutal, and so we have a culture of perfectionism. We have a culture of we beat ourselves up. We have a culture of self-hatred. These are broad brush terms. I'm not saying we're all like this, but these are the tendencies that I think individualism kind of exacerbates. But then on the other side, the idea that we are individual heroes and that we can do whatever we want, and we can. We are amazing. We have high self-esteem. It's fantastic because this pushes us along. The West are amazing at progress. We're amazing at civilization. We're amazing at human rights. Itself comes out of individualism. You don't get human rights without first realizing that the individual is the most important thing and not the group. So it's good and bad. And it's the same with collectivism. Collectivism is the natural human state. It's us individualists in the West who are weird. We're not the normal ones. Everywhere else in the world is much more collectivist, especially East Asia, the African countries, Indian countries, much more collectivist. And yes, they play status games in different ways. Primarily, that they see the job of earning status to be the job of the group to which they belong. So your primary motivation is to serve the group, and so that of course has good effects and bad effects. The bad effects being that individual human rights aren't taken anywhere near so seriously in other parts of the world. If you look at the nations that have outlawed torture, the nations that have outlawed capital punishment, the nations that have outlawed that have permitted gay marriage, the vast majority of them are individualist cultures, individualist nations. So yeah, these are complex systems, individualism and collectivism, with extremely complex trade-offs, and you simply can't answer the question of are they good or are they bad. And if anyone's trying to do that, then I think they're just telling you a story, a fairy tale.
Yes, yeah. Study the consequences to figure out what games are working and what aren't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I guess if I can kind of come back to this question of how do you keep score? That is it. How do you keep score? So, given that the Scion is a good 30 years old now.
Yeah.
Well, have you replaced it? Have you now got a graphics calculator to put in its place?
No, God, that was crazy.
How do you keep score, Will? And how have you? I mean, maybe a few questions there. How do you keep score? But also, as you've kind of pulled back from status games, you become aware that they're just like subterranean existence. Have you chosen to engage less in some and more in others? Because you think that's actually one I can win. That's one I'm never going to win.
Yeah, I have actually. I mean, what I realized when I wrote the book was that one of the things that I recommend in status game is that we play multiple games, and that's something that happens automatically when you become a parent. For example, you start playing the game of I want to be a good dad. I want to be a good mum. Most people don't just want to be a mum or a dad. They want to be a good mum and a good dad. So even on that level, we want to feel like, I want to do a good job of this, and so that becomes this other identity that people have. And I don't have children, so all I do is write, and so I became very aware of. I was keeping score by how many books I was selling, what reviewers were saying about my books, which is kind of a crazy thing because it's not really. There's only a limited amount that you can control. That you can do your best and work hard, but even then, you can't control how many books you're going to sell. You can't control how fashionable you are. You can't control what the critics are going to say about your books. And also, I'm staring down the barrel of 50 years old, and just thinking, well, like it or not, you're going to decline. Your brain is going to decline. This is, at some point, things are going to start falling to pieces. And if all you're doing is writing, and if that's the way that you're keeping score, that's not good, buddy. So I just consciously decided to volunteer in my spare time. So I started volunteering for a charity, which is something that I never would have considered in a million years before I wrote the Status Game. And I found, it's one of the best things I've ever done. I volunteer quite a lot of time now to this organization, and it's a bit because I didn't have any sources of kind of virtue-based status. What are you doing for anyone else, you selfish bastard, was the question that I started asking for myself. And so and what I found to my surprise, that it wasn't just that, because this organization, there was months of training before I could actually help anybody. But even before that, I would come back from these training sessions feeling really different, really happy, really much less depressed and anxious. And that was because of the connection that I was experiencing with the people that I was training with. So it was it's been hugely beneficial to me, and I'm hugely grateful for the possibility that I can do that, and that's purely come out of this question of how are you keeping score of how your life is going.
One thing I found helpful, because I'm kind of like middle-aged now, and in your book you reflect on the fact that you're writing in middle age, and you're realizing that the games of youth are not the games of middle age, or as we move into autumn or whatever of our lives. It made me think slightly of David Brooks's book, Second Mountain, where he talks about, did you know the book?
I've not read that one. I like David Brooks, but I've not read The Second Mountain.
I like that. I found it really helpful as a book. But he talked about the first mountain. It's much more like some status games are like very explicit, right? And it's much more explicit as a status game. And you're looking for, worldly success. And then the second status, well, not the second status game, the second mountain for him is committing to things that are bigger than yourself.
Right.
And he says that is kind of intrinsically rewarding. So he'd talk about the moral, the spiritual, the sense of belonging, a person. But you're ultimately... What's interesting, I think about it, is if the status games in the earlier parts of life, when you're building a self, are very kind of narrowly focused on the ego, that becomes like less interesting as you get older, and it also kind of loosens its grip, and maybe it frees you to pursue other games which are like seem to have more value. Is that kind of your experience?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, that's the thing. That's the sort of the caveat to the advice that was given about playing multiple games. Is actually, I think when you're in your teens and 20s, you should just probably focus on one. You should be a bit more ego driven, and because what you're doing in your teens and 20s is you're creating the rest of your life. It takes a long time to truly be of value to society. And that's what you're doing in your teens. You're figuring out your game, and you're throwing it, and you're learning from the people who are already up there. And so, and to become really successful, I think takes a bit of kind of single-mindedness. But it's certainly true what you're saying about the kind of second half of life where you can take a broader view and slow down and start playing some sort of more interesting games. But it's very hard. I'm always. I mean, one of the things I see in myself, which I can't just cringe all the time, is when I've got like teenage nieces. What one is nearly 18 and one is sort of 14, 15, And every time I'm with them, I'm like, I find myself lapsing into that. I was young once too, down with the kids, and it's like, oh God, and it's like you with you were just talking about how you just hear yourself, you become competitive. I just become this tragic middle-aged man trying to be cool, and it's just like, oh, stop it, I can't stop it though.
It happened I teach, and
Do you?
with my A-level students, there's like, I still feel like I'm like not much over 18 sometimes. I'm like, yeah, what's cool, guys? Like, and it's I mean, it must be painfully cringy. I'm sure there's a lot of Snapchat goes on about how painfully cringy this thing is. Really, really interesting, really helpful. So you've personally found it really helpful calling out what's going on in the subterranean levels at a status game. You've found that's kind of shifted where you put your attention.
Yeah, definitely, and it's changed my life literally, because I've now got this volunteering part of me which didn't exist before, and what's incredible about kind of starting and joining a new status game is that you find that you've got a new identity. It's almost like you've got a whole new room in your life opens up, a whole new way of being yourself comes into existence. I think every game that you play, you have a different identity, and every game that you play, you're a slightly different person. So it is such a gift, and it seems so banal to say that life isn't all about money and success, and it really isn't. I mean, and I think there's no way that you can really understand that without actually doing something that's nothing about money and feeling how rewarding it genuinely is, and that's a, as I said before, I would never have done it or believed it, I think, if I hadn't written the status game.
But it's interesting. You still feel like in doing that, you're still playing a status game.
Yeah, I would never say it to the people at the charity because I think I was mentally ill. they think I was some kind of sociopath. But it is. I mean, it's virtue-based status. It sounds awful probably, but it's why anybody does everything. I know from the people who were there. Well, okay, let's put it like this. For me, the very best part of the human condition is the fact that we feel rewarded when we help other people. So we have an automatic system of reward plugged into us, where when we are of value, of service to other people selflessly, other people reward us, but also we feel good about ourselves. You feel lighter, you feel better about yourself. That's wired in. As long as you're not a psychopath or a sociopath, as long as you've got a normal brain, that's wired in. And that is the very best of human condition. Like, if you didn't have that, human life really would be sort of like nature red in tooth and claw. But we're better than that as an animal. And so by saying it's kind of virtue-based status, I know in the context of our culture that sounds like I'm saying I'm kind of shitting on it, but I'm not at all. I think that the fact that we award ourselves and other people status, by which I mean we just consider that you're of value. That's what status is. It's saying you're of value. That's a wonderful thing that we do. When they invented the AstraZeneca vaccine, we put them on the front of newspapers and we made them celebrities, the women who did that, and that's brilliant that we do that. I love the fact that we do that. We celebrate people, and we celebrate ourselves when we feel like we've done something good. That's great. I think that's wonderful.
Brought to mind a reflection from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl, the psychiatrist. So I find I'm a total sucker for books with titles like Man's Search for Meaning, and he says that we have an infinite appetite for money, sex, and power. So you have Adler and Freud and whoever, who says those were like, you'll never have enough of them. If that's where you're going to try and tap meaning, you're never going to be satisfied. You'll never have enough power, never enough money, never enough sex. And that, it seems to be true for those people who are pursuing it. But if you turn your attention to, what's he say? Spiritual, moral, creative, and relational goods. Those are like inherently rewarding. You can feel So there's a sense in which the distinction he's making in your way of thinking is like, here's some like toxic games that might never be that rewarding. We're all driven to play them by base appetites and instincts. But here are some games that, like, they're infinite games as well, but that they're better to play in terms of
Yeah, I love Man's Search for Meaning and I love Viktor Frankl, but I would question some of that. Like firstly, we know, for example, that actually not everybody wants money. Like there are different kinds of games that we play, and only a subsection have got this incredible. Like money gets us pleasure and it gets us security. So, but once we've got enough, for a lot of people, they're not particularly. I'm not particularly. I don't worry about. I'm not particularly driven by money. And lots of people I know aren't. And we know for a fact that power isn't as either. So there, of course, there are a subset of people that love power, and will do anything to get power. But for most people, when they get a certain amount of power, they don't want any more, because with power becomes responsibility. With power becomes the expectation of work. Status is different. Nobody ever, when psychologists try to find the point where I need desire for status levels off, they can't find it. So that's the first thing I say about that. The second thing is these virtue games are also the worst games that we play, because Viktor Frankl, of course, was a Holocaust survivor. Hitler thought he was a good man. He thought he was by ridding the world of Judaism, he was doing a selfless good thing. Stalin thought he was a good man. Lenin thought he was a good man. Does Putin think he's a good man? Maybe, but so virtue games are also the very worst games that we play. The most reprehensible, depraved acts that have ever been committed on this planet have been by people who are convinced of their own kind of moral virtue. In our lifetime, the invasion of Iraq would be the thing that I would sort of point to. So I just be very careful about those virtue games, because the brain is very good at telling us that we're virtuous when we're being absolutely horrific to other people. Whether it's racism, sexism, anything, any ism. Often that's those isms are dressed up in stories of our virtue. That permits. A woman is allowed to say that all men are shit and I hate men. A man is allowed to say, "Oh, women are useless and incompetent," because, and they'll tell themselves a story where actually I've got every right to say this because. So yeah, I think those virtue games are kind of dangerous. And as I say, one of the ways that my mind changed was that that you realize it's the success games that actually do make the world a better place, that do create cheap food and feed people and clothe people and house people. It's the people who are solving problems that actually are do much greater good than the people that are kind of going to religion and going to political ideology. In my view, I think it's inarguable. The other thing to say about that is that what Frankl is right about, and it's the curse of status really, is that you can never be happy with status. Status can never make you happy. Connection, I think, can, but status can't, because it's always ephemeral. You can always be taken away.
Right?
Like the CEO can be made to feel like an absolute idiot in a meeting. And the most junior person in the meeting can make feel amazing if they contribute a great idea. People at the very tops of their games, Obama, Zelensky, whoever they might be, no matter how famous and successful that might be, they're looking at their peer. They're not competing with you or I, aren't normal people. They're competing with people on their level. And so Macron competes with Rishi Sunak, competes with Biden. That's the game they're playing. So even though they're amongst the most famous and powerful individuals in the world, they're still not guaranteed. And they've got extremely high status. They care about the judgments of other extremely high status people, and you can never keep it. That's the thing about status. You can't keep it in a box and put it under your pillow and say that's my status, because it might go tomorrow, and it probably will. So that's the kind of some of the most meaningful, happy moments in our lives are to do with status. They're when we win prizes and achieve qualifications, and have books published and get your first podcast or whatever it might be. But they go away. You can't keep them. The next day you want the next thing, and you want the next thing, and you want the next thing. And it's a blessing and a curse, because it's the wanting the next thing and wanting to get that, chasing the dragon of status and wanting to get it back, that keeps you pushing on and keeps you making better and better podcasts and keeps me hopefully writing better and better books. I mean, that's what it's there for. It's this kind of, it can be amazing, but it can be a bastard as well.
That's I think that's a helpful place to kind of draw it to a close. Like, in terms of parting advice on this question of how am I keeping score, what are you sending people off to do with that question?
Just try and be conscious of it. I think that's the thing. I mean, I'm just really interested in it not just in the status context, but also in the connection context. In your, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, in your marriage, like one of the ways that marriages or long-term relationships are all different is that they'll have different. With your partner, you have this extremely complex and mostly, or if not completely unconscious, list of ways that you're both each judging how things are going, and so how are you doing that, and why, and is that sensible? I think that by sort of thinking about how you're keeping score of your connection, your status, by making that stuff conscious, you can hopefully become a bit more wise about yourself and your flaws.
Sort of renegotiate the terms of the game that you're playing
consciously. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's really helpful. Will, thank you so much for imparting your wisdom. It's been, for me, absolutely fascinating to hear and to think about. I am going to be thinking about how I'm keeping score, I think, for a while. I think maybe the rest of my life as I kind of switch games. I'm in that transition of shifting games at the moment, I think. So yeah. So I
wish you all the best, Kenneth. Yeah, good luck with the changes in your life. I hope it goes well for you, and thank you for having me on tonight.
Well, thank you very much, and you too, Will. It's like a joy to hear of the new room in your life that's opened up through volunteering. I think that's a great image and a great inspiration for kind of Thanks, enlarging your life through virtue status. I hope you've enjoyed listening to episode 5 of the Examined Life podcast. If you're interested in the ideas discussed today, or in Will Storr generally, then head over to willstorr.com to find out more. I'm grateful to Will Storr for his time today, to my wonderful brother Colin for any music you heard, and of course to you for listening all the way to the end. As ever, I'd be delighted if you would let me know your thoughts either by email or through a review, and do please share the episode with others you think might like it. And if you haven't done so yet, then please sign up for the mailing list to receive musings on the questions we should be asking ourselves today. You'll find a sign up form at examinedlife.com. I'll be back here in 2 weeks' time with the writer, activist and filmmaker Helena Norberg Hodge, who'll be joining me for episode 6 of the Examined Life podcast.